Before we begin tonight's reflection, I want to share something from my own journey. There was a time when I felt lost inside my own mind. I would wake up in the middle of the night, thoughts racing, fears chasing themselves in endless loops. I kept asking myself, why does life feel so heavy? Why does it seem like the world pushes back against me when all I want is peace? And then, I came across an ancient teaching in Tibetan Buddhism, the wisdom of the cosmic mirror. It says that life does not simply happen to us. Life responds to us. Every experience, every relationship, every moment we meet, reflects what we're carrying inside. At first, I resisted this idea. It felt uncomfortable to think that maybe the world wasn't the problem, maybe it was my own unrest, my own fear, my own need to control. But slowly, as I began to soften, as I allowed myself to simply be present with whatever was here, something shifted. The world softened too. I began to notice the small things, how tension in my chest would ease when I stopped chasing certainty. How people around me seemed calmer when I met them with patience instead of expectation. How life began to move differently, not because the outside changed, but because I did. And tonight, as you prepare to drift into sleep, I invite you to feel this wisdom for yourself, not as an idea to analyze, but as a quiet experience to rest in. You don't need to fix anything. You don't need to solve your whole life tonight. All you need to do is let go, soften, and listen. Because the cosmic mirror is always reflecting, and the question is not what it shows, but how you choose to meet it. So, let's begin. As you fall asleep tonight, notice the gentle hush that settles over the world, the quiet of your room, the steady rhythm of your breath, the tender way your thoughts begin to fade. Have you ever wondered what might happen if you carried that same silence into your waking life? Not as an escape, but as a way to hear yourself more clearly, and perhaps to hear something far greater. There comes a subtle moment in practice when you learn to witness your thoughts without becoming them. Without the constant chatter of speech reinforcing your identity, the ego slowly begins to lose its grip. Its opinions no longer find a place to land. Its endless stories meet no audience. And in that space, you begin to notice something quietly beautiful. So much of what you once believed you had to say was only meant to protect a version of yourself that never truly existed. When this is seen clearly, the ego softens, its tight hold relaxes, and what takes its place is not a cold, empty void, but a steady, luminous awareness, a presence that doesn't need to narrate every detail of life to feel alive. A kind of knowing that recognizes truth, yet has no need to explain it. And the remarkable thing is, this practice doesn't require anything extreme. You don't have to vanish into remote mountains or take a vow of lifelong silence. You can begin exactly where you are, in the quiet corners of an ordinary day. A few minutes of morning without speaking. A simple walk with no music. No phone, just the sound of your footsteps and the wind in the trees. A meal enjoyed without distraction. Small moments like these matter more than we often realize. They gently reshape how you relate to yourself and to the world around you. Over time, silence stops feeling awkward. It becomes a companion, a refuge you can return to when the world grows too loud. When your mind races, silence slows the endless spinning. When life feels chaotic, it brings you home, not to a physical place, but to yourself. And as you grow familiar with this quiet, something remarkable happens. You begin to hear again, not just your restless thoughts or unmet needs, but the steady pulse of something greater, moving through everything. It isn't a voice booming from the sky or answers etched in stone. More often, it's a soft knowing, arising when you've finally become quiet enough to receive it. And what you discover is this: when you stop endlessly filling the space, You realize the space itself is not empty. It is brimming with guidance, with clarity, with wisdom. You begin to trust it, to live by it. Your decisions no longer come from a place of panic or noise, but from deep inner alignment. You say yes not from pressure, but from clarity. You say no without guilt. You stop feeling the need to explain your truth because you're no longer disconnected from it. And in those moments when you do speak, your words carry the presence of that silence. They are fewer, more honest, less reactive, and infinitely kinder. They aren't spoken to cover the quiet, but to express what it has revealed. The more you practice noble silence, the more natural it becomes. You begin to crave it, not as an escape, but as a return to alignment. You stop running from your inner world and start resting within it. And from that restful place, a new kind of movement emerges, one not driven by anxiety or compulsion, but guided by stillness. You begin to realize, silence is not the opposite of action. It is the source of wise, meaningful action. It's the ground from which true response is born. It is where clarity replaces confusion, where knowing replaces doubt, where authentic connection replaces mere performance. This is the quiet power of noble silence. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand attention, and it never seeks credit. Yet it changes everything, not by forcing, but by allowing, not by controlling each moment, but by fully entering it. And in that fullness, you begin to sense not only your own thoughts but the quiet rhythm of something infinitely larger. A presence that has always been waiting to be heard. In silence, you remember, and in remembering, you trust. The deeper you go, the more clearly you begin to feel what words so often fail to express. Beneath all the noise, beyond every restless question, and past every layer of confusion, what remains is tenderness, not weakness, but a raw, open presence that notices suffering and does not turn away. And this is one of the great gifts of noble silence. It doesn't just reconnect you to your own truth. It softens the boundary between you and the world. You begin to realize, in some quiet, undeniable way, that your pain is not separate from anyone else's, that your healing is intimately tied to theirs. And from this recognition, something powerful stirs within you, the will to serve, the longing to awaken, not just for yourself, but for all beings. This is the very heart of the Bodhisattva path in Mahayana Buddhism. A vow not merely to seek wisdom for your own peace, but to offer it, not to withdraw from the world, but to meet it with a quiet, steady, compassionate heart. And perhaps, as you fall asleep tonight, you'll sense it too, that beyond every restless thought, beneath every racing worry, there is a quiet presence waiting for you. A tenderness, a knowing, an invitation to come home to yourself. The Bodhisattva is not some flawless, untouchable figure or distant, unreachable ideal. It is not about perfection. It's a commitment, a direction of the heart, a vow made again and again, not because of obligation, but born out of deep, unwavering compassion. The vow itself is simple, yet carries a radical tenderness. I will not abandon this world. I will awaken fully, and I will keep returning for others, even if it takes countless lifetimes. These are not just poetic words spoken in temples or whispered on meditation cushions. They are a bold, living act of trust, because when you take such a vow, even if you utter it only in the quiet of your own heart, you are declaring something profoundly different. You are saying that liberation is not about personal escape. It is a shared journey. That true freedom is not real unless it includes all beings. And that the deepest purpose in life is not self-improvement for its own sake, but boundless, unconditional care. This vow quietly reshapes everything. It anchors your path in something much bigger than your personal comfort. It gives meaning to difficulty. It reframes struggle, When pain inevitably arises, and it will, you no longer ask only, "How can I get rid of this?" Instead, you begin to ask, "How can I learn from this? How can I transform it? How can I use this to better understand the suffering of others?" Your own pain stops being just yours. It becomes part of your training, a way to deepen your capacity to witness and hold the pain of others without turning away. And this is vital, because the Bodhisattva doesn't wait to become perfect before taking the vow. That's not the point. The vow is made right here, in the middle of the mess, in the face of doubt, in the presence of fear. It is the vow itself that carries you through those dark places. It holds you steady when your motivation falters. It reminds you that this path is not about always feeling good, or always being certain. It's about staying open, present, and committed, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And as you live with this vow, something begins to shift. Instead of constantly asking, "What do I need?" you start to wonder, "What is needed?" You begin listening not just to your own heart, but to the world around you, to the silent, often unseen suffering in others. And that listening becomes action. It becomes presence. It becomes a quiet, steady willingness to keep going, even when the path feels uncomfortable. Why? Because somewhere inside you have seen, even if just for a fleeting moment, that compassion is more powerful than fear. And that glimpse changes you. Here's the most beautiful part. The more you offer yourself to this vow, the more supported you begin to feel. Not by certainty, not by control, but by a deeper current. A sense that you are not alone in this. That the very fabric of existence is woven from compassion. Not as sentiment, not as naive hope, but as a living truth. You start to trust this, not as a belief you hold in your mind, but as something you feel in your bones. A knowing that grows stronger each time you choose to live the vow, not just think about it. And this trust quietly becomes your strength. When the path feels unclear, when setbacks knock the breath from your chest, when emotions overwhelm and wear you down, you return to the vow. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need to know every step ahead. You have direction. You have intention. You have a reason to take the very next step. And that next step is always here. Always available. Always sacred. The Bodhisattva vow is not only profound, it's deeply practical. It teaches you how to move through a world full of suffering without becoming bitter, hardened, or hopeless. It doesn't ask you to fix everything. It asks you to respond, to stay open, to keep showing up, even when it would be easier to close off. Not because you're winning, but because others are hurting. And that kind of commitment, steady, humble, unwavering, begins to grow a different kind of trust within you. Not just in your own strength, but in the goodness of the path itself. In the real possibility of inner transformation. In the timeless truth that compassion is not weakness, but wisdom in motion. When you begin to act from compassion, truly, not as performance but from the quiet clarity of your heart, something subtle yet powerful happens. You don't just ease the suffering of others, you become less entangled in your own. The heaviness you once carried starts to lift. You feel lighter, freer, more aligned with something vast and timeless. Something far greater than yourself. And this isn't about denying yourself or self-sacrifice. It's about self-expansion. When you hold the Bodhisattva vow in your heart, you don't disappear, you don't become less of yourself. In fact, you become more fully who you really are. You begin to see yourself as inseparable from the whole, a single note within the larger, infinite symphony of life. And in that recognition, a deep, steady sense of purpose naturally arises. Not the kind of purpose that depends on praise, approval, or visible results, but the kind that holds steady in all conditions, in joy, in grief, in uncertainty, and even in failure. You also begin to understand that compassion is not always gentle or soft. Sometimes it's fierce. Sometimes it requires setting boundaries, saying no, or speaking difficult truths. But when those actions are rooted in the vow, they're free of ego and self-interest. You're not acting to be right, to be seen, or to gain anything. You act because the vow itself asks, how can I reduce harm? How can I serve awakening in this moment? This shift in mindset begins to shape everything. It shapes how you speak, how you listen, how you spend your time. You start letting go of the things that no longer serve that deeper intention. You stop waiting for everything in your life to be perfect before you offer help to others. You stop telling yourself that you need to be fully healed, fully enlightened, or endlessly calm before you show up for the world. You begin right where you are, with what you have, again and again, and each time you return to the vow, something within you settles. The restless fluctuations of the ego lose their grip. The loud, demanding voice of fear softens. You begin to trust the vow more than you trust your passing moods. You trust compassion more than you trust your fears. And this isn't about ignoring your own needs, it's about recognizing that your deepest need, your most authentic longing, is to live in alignment with your heart. And when you live that way, you find it naturally includes the well-being of the whole world. Walking this bodhisattva path also quietly transforms your relationship with time. You stop craving immediate results. You stop needing people to change on your schedule. You release the constant demand that your efforts produce visible, tangible outcomes. You trust instead that seeds are being planted. You trust that presence matters, even when it seems unproductive. You come to embody patience, not as passive waiting, but as faithful staying true to your vow, staying connected to your deeper intention. And this kind of trust is unshakable because it isn't based on outcomes. It's rooted in your deepest intention. You may not control the results, and you don't need to, because you've entrusted yourself to something larger, something enduring, something beyond fleeting rewards. As this vow lives within you, your relationship with fear changes. Fear may still visit you, but it no longer defines you. It becomes something you carry, not something that paralyzes you. The vow, steady and clear, is stronger than fear. It gives your courage a reason. It reminds you that the goal is not to avoid difficulty or pain, but to meet him with wisdom and love. You begin to see that the true path isn't about defeating others or even overcoming yourself. It's about remembering who you really are beneath all the defenses, old patterns, and lingering doubts. You are not merely a person struggling to get by. You are a being committed to awakening, not just for your own peace, but for the liberation of all beings. And that kind of commitment does not go unnoticed. The universe, in its quiet and mysterious ways, begins to reflect that back to you, not always through grand miracles, but through subtle support, a sense of being carried when you thought you were alone, a clarity arising in the middle of confusion, a strength that appears when you believed you had nothing left to give. These are the quiet signs that the vow is alive in you, that you are not walking this path alone. The path of the Bodhisattva is vast, wide as the sky. There is no end to compassion, no finish line to cross, no final checklist to complete. And this is precisely what makes it so powerful. It asks for your whole life, not as perfection, but as an offering, not as performance, but as presence. You don't need to be extraordinary. You don't need to be special. You only need to care deeply and act accordingly. Little by little, moment by moment, the vow becomes less about words you remember and more about the way you live, the way you move, the way you meet the world. And over time, you no longer have to remind yourself what matters. You embody it. It lives through you, and that steady presence, That quiet integrity becomes a light for others, not because you're trying to lead, but because people feel something steady in you, something trustworthy, something quietly, undeniably real. This is how the Bodhisattva vow anchors your trust, not in certainty, not in the illusion of control, but in connection, not in knowing exactly how life will unfold, but in compassion itself. You begin to see the entire world as part of your path. Every being you meet, every moment you live through, every breath you take becomes an opportunity to awaken a little more, and to quietly help others awaken too. And this brings with it a joy, not the fleeting, surface kind, but a deep, steady joy, the kind that arises when you live in alignment with your heart. The kind that comes from knowing that your life is not separate from the vast, interconnected fabric of existence, that your healing supports the healing of others, that your presence matters, even when no one else sees it, even when no one claps, or notices, or thanks you. The vow lives in everything you do, whether the world acknowledges it or not. And you come to realize, this is not a burden, it's a blessing. A gentle, steady reminder that you are not here for yourself alone. You are part of something so much larger, something quietly sacred, and that something is woven through with compassion. You can feel it whenever you pause, whenever you take a conscious breath, whenever you stop chasing and remember what truly matters. In those moments, you naturally return to the vow again, softly, fully, willingly. And in those moments, it is enough. And when you make that vow, not just for yourself but for all beings, for every living thing, something begins to shift inside. You start to sense it not merely as a beautiful concept, but as a living truth. You are not separate, your suffering is not just yours, and your healing ripples outward, far beyond the limits of your skin, your voice, your lifetime. Every act of care, no matter how small, every breath of mindfulness, every time you choose presence over distraction, kindness over indifference, it touches a thread in a much larger, unseen fabric, one that quietly connects everything. And this connection is not a metaphor. It's not poetic language. It is reality itself. Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh called this interbeing, a simple, tender word for a truth that is endless in its depth. Interbeing means that nothing exists in isolation. Everything leans on everything else. A flower cannot bloom without the rain, the soil, the warmth of the sun, the hand of the gardener, and the countless lifetimes that made those elements possible. A human cannot breathe without the trees, cannot speak without language, cannot live without the care of others, whether those others stand beside them or quietly exist on the other side of the world. To be is to interbe. Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings on interbeing are not abstract philosophies meant for books or distant monasteries. They are immediate, practical, intimately personal. They offer a new way of moving through life, not through the painful illusion of isolation, but through the lens of belonging. Not the kind of belonging that requires you to fit in or win approval, but the kind that simply is. You belong because you exist. You belong because everything that exists through relationship, and your life is possible only because countless others have touched it, shaped it, made it possible. And when you see this clearly, when you really feel it in your bones, fear begins to soften. So much of the fear that grips the human heart comes from the belief that we are alone, that our pain is ours alone to carry, that our joys are fleeting because they end with us, that our mistakes somehow separate us from love, from belonging, from worthiness. Interbeing dissolves this illusion. It shows you that your joy is part of a shared, collective joy, that your pain echoes through generations, not to weigh you down, but so it can be seen, held, and transformed, that your life is never truly separate, even in your loneliest moments. And this doesn't mean losing yourself in others. It means seeing yourself more clearly because of others. Thich Nhat Hanh often spoke of how you cannot remove a single sheet of paper from the sun, the cloud, the rain, or the lumberjack, that the paper holds them all within it, the tree, the earth, the logger's labor, even the cloud that became rain. In the same way, you carry your parents, your ancestors, your teachers, your friends, and even strangers who have unknowingly shaped your life. And when you start to live with this awareness, your sense of self loosens. You stop needing to define yourself so rigidly. You stop clinging to separateness as a form of safety. Instead, you soften into connection, not as an idea, not as a philosophy, but in the way you breathe, in the way you speak, in the way you listen. And in that softening, something within you finally feels like it has come home. You begin to realize that your words, every one of them, are not isolated. They ripple through the space around you. They shape not just the heart of the person you're speaking to, but the entire atmosphere you inhabit. Every conversation, every sentence you utter, even the tone of your voice, leaves an imprint in the world you're part of. Thich Nhat Hanh often invited people to slow down and truly notice this. To walk gently, to eat with presence, to speak with care, not as empty rituals or spiritual performances, but as doorways into deeper awareness. Because when you eat a piece of fruit with your full attention, you don't just taste sweetness. You taste the earth, the rain, the warmth of the sun, the hands that picked it, the soil that nourished it, the generations that made this simple bite possible. You taste the entire world in a single moment. And in that kind of awareness, gratitude arises, not forced, not practiced because you think you should, but natural, effortless. It's the gratitude that comes when you see how completely your life depends on everything else. This awareness of interbeing deepens not only gratitude, but also responsibility, not the heavy, guilt-laden kind, but the kind born of love. When you begin to feel, not just believe, that your well-being is tied to the well-being of others, you care differently, you move through the world differently. You act, not only for yourself, but for the greater whole. You begin to see that healing your own heart sends out ripples that soften the hearts of others. That when you're patient with yourself, it somehow makes you more patient with the people around you. That when you choose words of kindness, you change the very air others breathe. Interbeing teaches us that transformation doesn't happen in neat, linear steps. It doesn't belong to one person at a time. It moves in waves. It ripples outward. Every small act of mindfulness, every moment of compassion, every conscious breath is part of a vast, unseen movement. And this understanding gives meaning to even the tiniest gesture, a sincere smile, a deep breath instead of a sharp reply, a small pause before reacting. These things may seem insignificant, but they are threads woven into the great tapestry of life. The beauty of this way of seeing is that it makes room for everything. You don't need to deny your suffering in order to belong to the whole. You don't need to hide the parts of yourself that feel broken or lost. Interbeing includes your jagged edges. It makes space for your shadows. It welcomes the pieces of you that still feel unworthy or cut off. Because even those parts are the result of relationships, of old pain, unmet needs, forgotten kindnesses. Nothing stands outside the great web of connection. And this brings humility. You begin to see that you have no idea what others are carrying. You stop rushing to judgment. You ask different questions. Not, what's wrong with them, but, what are they connected to that I cannot see? You start listening more closely for what isn't being said. You begin to honor the depth, the complexity, the sacred history within every being you meet. This awareness also helps you meet difficulty without falling into despair. Because even when the world seems dark, When headlines overflow with division, cruelty, and hatred, you remember that this is not the whole story. There are always, quietly, millions of unseen acts of care, of courage, of resilience. The good in this world isn't louder, but it is constant. It lives in the great web, in the simple daily choices of ordinary people, in the quiet prayers said before sleep, in the meals shared in silence, in the people who choose kindness when no one's watching. Thich Nhat Hanh's own life was a testament to this. A monk, a poet, a peace activist, who worked tirelessly for justice, but never abandoned stillness. He understood that true peace isn't a retreat from the world, but a way of walking through it, awake, open, and tenderly aware. For him, every mindful breath connected to the breath of the earth. Every kind word watered seeds of trust in another's heart. His mindfulness was not an escape, but a way of being in harmony with all life. And so it is for us. Interbeing is not just a philosophy, not a theory to memorize. It's a way of living. You don't have to understand it all with your mind. You begin to sense it in your body. You feel it in the quiet moments, in the spaces between words. You start to realize that your heartbeat is part of a much greater pulse. That your healing is connected to the earth healing. That your laughter clears the sky. That your tears feed a river flowing toward wholeness. And when you stumble, as you will, this awareness holds you. It reminds you that no mistake can sever your belonging. No sorrow can isolate you from the web. That every step, even the clumsy, broken ones, are woven into the same great tapestry of life. You are not alone in your confusion. You are not the first to feel lost, uncertain, or overwhelmed on this path. Others have walked it before you. And right now, in this very moment, countless others are walking it too. You may not see them, but their presence is real. You can lean on the strength of those who have gone before, on the wisdom of those who are quietly walking beside you, and on the compassion of those who carry this same longing in their hearts. The Bodhisattvas, the awakened beings, the ancestors who whispered kindness into the world long before you arrived, they are always near. The visible and invisible community of the wise surrounds you, holding you in a great unseen web. And even when you forget this connection, it does not leave you. It holds you in silence, in stillness, in breath. Slowly, you begin to live with a little more ease. Not because life has suddenly become easy, but because you stop trying to carry it all by yourself. You no longer fight against the world as if it were separate from you. You begin to recognize a simple, steady truth: your suffering is not separate. And because of that, your healing is not separate either. The weight you carry is shared. The love you give matters beyond what you can see. You find the courage to ask for help when you need it, to offer help when you are able, to forgive, even when it feels difficult, to rest, knowing that even in stillness, you are contributing to the wholeness of the world, because everything you do, or do not do, affects the greater whole. Even silence becomes a form of connection. You realize that you don't always need the right words to belong. You don't need a perfect explanation to be understood. Sometimes, just being present with someone is enough. Sometimes, walking beside them in quiet awareness speaks louder than any conversation. Sometimes, sitting with a person in their grief, without trying to fix it, without rushing it away, is the deepest act of love you can offer. This understanding also changes how you see the natural world. The earth is no longer something outside of you to be used or taken for granted. It is part of your very body. The trees exhale what you inhale. The water you drink moves through the veins of everything that lives. You begin to care for the planet not because it's a moral obligation, but because its well-being is inseparable from your own. Your sense of time shifts too. The past isn't some distant, untouchable story. The future is not out of reach. Every moment contains echoes of what came before and seeds of what will come after. What you do now ripples both backward and forward, changing what unfolds later. In this way, your healing becomes a thread not only for yourself, but for generations past and yet to come. Interbeing transcends time. It reminds you that you are part of a vast continuum, that the love you offer now might reach someone centuries from today. And this gives rise to a quiet, steady trust, not a trust built on certainty or guarantees, but on the simple, living power of presence. A trust that you don't have to know all the answers. That sometimes, just being here, fully, is enough. You learn to trust that every act of care, no matter how small, helps mend the web. That even on days when you feel broken or lost, your presence matters. This kind of trust doesn't make you naive. It makes you wise, because now, you see suffering more clearly. And you don't turn away. You stay, you breathe, you offer what you can, from wherever you are, and that is enough. You stop believing that you must save the world. You realize you were never meant to act alone. Every time you choose to come back, to presence, to compassion, to truth, you strengthen the invisible web. You help hold the world together. You create space for healing, for connection, for tenderness to grow, and in that space, you are no longer lost. You realize you were never separate to begin with. You are part of the movement, part of the breath, part of the earth, the sky, the rain, part of the strangers walking beside you, part of the ancestors behind you, and part of the unborn children yet to come. You are already woven into everything that is. And this belonging is not something you have to earn. It is your birthright. It is what you are. Once you feel this, truly feel it, the question you ask yourself begins to shift. It moves from who am I, to how am I showing up now? What am I bringing into this moment? Not in theory, but right here, in this breath, in this gesture, in this thought. The wisdom of interbeing pulls your attention fully into now, not to escape the world, but to finally join it, not to control it, but to meet it as it is. And when you live from this awareness, that everything is connected, your presence becomes something more than awareness. It becomes alignment. This is where mindfulness stops being just a practice and becomes a way of belonging to the great pulse of the universe itself. Not because life demands perfection from you, but because when you are fully present, you naturally move in tune with it. The more aware you become, the more sensitive you grow to the quiet intelligence flowing through all things. You stop living by habit, and begin living by direct contact with life itself. And in that, mindfulness becomes not a technique, but a path home. It is not a passive state. It is active participation. Mindfulness means giving your full attention to what is here, to this breath, to this sound, to this feeling, without the filters of past regrets or future expectations. You stop treating the present moment as a means to an end, no longer turning each experience into a stepping stone to get to somewhere else. Instead, you arrive, and in that simple, radical arrival, something quiet and profound opens within you, clarity. But this clarity is not an idea. It's not another thought to chase or dissect. It is a direct seeing, a felt knowing. You begin to understand without needing to explain, to sense what needs to be done without overanalyzing, to say what needs to be said without rehearsing it first. Not because you've perfected yourself, but because you've allowed yourself to move in rhythm with what is unfolding right now. You trust your next step, not because you've calculated every possible outcome, but because it rises from grounded presence, from a place within you untouched by anxious overthinking. This is what it means to be truly aligned, not with your rigid plans, not with what you expected life to be, but with the deeper current moving beneath it all. The moment you release your tight grip on how you think things should be, and soften into how they actually are. You open yourself to the natural flow of life. And this flow is not random. It is intelligent, deeply balanced, carrying within it the wisdom of all things. Mindfulness is the key that unlocks this balance. When you are fully present, you stop adding extra layers of resistance. You stop feeding the constant, restless commentary of the mind. You begin to witness your thoughts. Instead of becoming them, you feel emotions fully, but no longer let them rule your every move. You make space for what is truly here. And in that spaciousness, something else enters, insight. And insight, like a delicate fragrance, rises not through force, but through stillness. When your attention is rooted in the present, you become more available to what is true, to what has been quietly waiting for you beneath all the noise. You notice subtle patterns you used to miss. You hear what is usually drowned out by busyness. You find yourself responding, instead of reacting. This doesn't mean that life suddenly becomes easy. Hard moments will still arrive. Pain will still visit, but you are no longer lost when it does. You no longer drown in confusion. Because something in you remembers, the universe is always moving toward balance. Even when on the surface, it looks like chaos. And when you meet the world with full awareness, you align yourself with that balancing force. Your presence becomes part of that gentle, healing current. You don't have to understand the whole picture. You only have to stay close to what is real, what is true, right now. This is why mindfulness is not a retreat from life. It's not hiding on a mountain or escaping discomfort. It is a full, fearless entry into life as it is. When you are truly present, you stop operating from a fixed identity. You stop defending old stories, or fearing what's to come. You become available to life, freshly, as it arises. And that kind of availability is a quiet, steady kind of power, not the power to dominate, but the power to cooperate, the power that listens, that adapts, that moves in harmony with what's unfolding instead of against it. Mindfulness also reshapes your relationship with time. The future no longer haunts you with constant anxiety. The past stops weighing you down like a heavy stone in your chest. You begin to realize that the only place life can actually be touched, known, and lived is here, right where you are. Plans may still be made, and that's fine, but you no longer cling to them as the source of your happiness. Memories may still surface, but you no longer mistake them for reality. Instead, you begin to live with one foot firmly planted in the ground beneath you, fully rooted in now. And in that groundedness, a new steadiness appears, a steadiness that does not depend on life behaving the way you expect, but on your ability to meet it as it is. There is a kind of peace that doesn't come from having everything resolved. It comes from no longer being scattered, from no longer chasing 1,000 threads of thought into the past and future. Your energy, once divided across countless timelines, returns to this moment, right here, and because of that, you begin to act with greater clarity, speak with greater honesty, and listen with your whole presence. You become someone others can trust, not because you're perfect, but because you're steady, and perhaps even more importantly, you become someone you can trust, no longer pulled in so many directions. Your heart aligns with itself. This integrity, this quiet coherence, gives your presence a rare depth. When you practice mindfulness, you are not pretending to be calm. You are rooted in calm. You're not performing thoughtfulness, you are thinking with true care. You stop managing impressions and begin living from a place of truth. And people can sense this. The atmosphere around you shifts. Even without words, the world itself seems to respond differently, as though recognizing something steady, something sincere. And this is where your trust in the intelligence of life begins to deepen. The more you stay here, in the present moment, The more you realize, you are not carrying everything alone. Some moments unfold with a perfect, effortless timing, and you weren't the one controlling it. Some answers arrive the moment you stop forcing them. Certain doors open only when you pause long enough to notice them. Are these coincidences? Or are they the quiet, natural results of living in alignment with the present? More and more, you'll see it's the latter. When mindfulness anchors you, life stops feeling like a puzzle you must constantly solve. Instead, it becomes something you're invited to participate in. Every moment brings not just pleasure or pain, but teaching, guidance, a gentle invitation to come closer to the center of your own awareness. And the more you accept that invitation, even in moments of discomfort, the clearer life becomes. Presence teaches you how to stay grounded when things feel difficult. You stop rushing to fix every discomfort. You let yourself remain with the feeling, to learn from it, to allow it to soften you, to move through you. This kind of patience is not weakness. It's a quiet form of strength. It changes your nervous system, retrains your reactive mind, and shows your heart how to stay open even when uncertainty surrounds you. When you're truly present, you realize you no longer need to perform for others. You don't have to chase approval or constantly seek out validation. You don't have to fill every silence or chase after meaning. Because meaning begins to arise on its own, naturally, through the simple, attentive way you meet each moment. A single breath, a mindful step, a kind word. These small, ordinary acts become quietly meaningful when you offer them your full presence. And here's the beautiful thing, that presence is contagious. When others are with you, they too feel subtly invited to slow down, to set aside their defenses, to become a little more real. True presence doesn't have to announce itself. It doesn't shout. It simply changes the atmosphere. It reminds people of something they've forgotten, their own inherent steadiness, the peace they've been too busy to notice. This is why mindfulness, at its heart, is not just a form of personal self-help. It is an act of service. It is how we contribute to the collective sanity of the world. In a culture obsessed with speed and performance, your stillness becomes a quiet form of rebellion. In a world consumed by distraction, your careful attention becomes a form of medicine. And when you are here, fully, humbly, unapologetically present, you become a mirror in which others can catch a glimpse of their own clarity. Mindfulness also gently teaches you to let go of the exhausting need for control. You begin to notice that the tighter you cling, the more you suffer. But when you soften your grip, life responds in unexpected ways. This isn't a promise that everything will go your way. It means you stop needing it to. You begin to trust that even when plans unravel, presence remains. That even when outcomes shift, your ability to meet the moment, calmly, wisely, kindly, is untouched. And so mindfulness becomes not a tool you reach for only when things fall apart, but the very foundation you walk upon. You eat with awareness. You speak with care. You listen without rushing to fix. You rest without guilt. You walk without needing to arrive. Each ordinary moment feels complete. Not because it's perfect, but because you are in it fully. And when you do this, when you give yourself wholly to the present, your inner world begins to transform. The endless noise of thought softens. Emotions lose their power to overwhelm. Your body relaxes into a natural ease you might have forgotten was possible. You begin to notice, more quickly than before, the quiet signs of disconnection, the restless mind, the tightening chest, the sudden urge to escape. And instead of spiraling deeper into those old, familiar patterns, you learn to return. Return before the storm gathers. Return before the weight settles in. This is resilience, not the kind built by hardening yourself against the world, but the kind born from staying soft, staying clear, and staying open. Mindfulness, you realize, isn't about achieving some flawless, permanent state of peace. It's about returning, again and again. Each breath is an invitation to come home. Each pause, a doorway back to yourself. And slowly, you stop needing to escape your own company. You begin to enjoy simply being with yourself. Not because you've erased every flaw, but because you've dropped the constant, harsh judgment. This simple act of self-acceptance is one of the deepest gifts presence can offer. When you are mindful, you stop editing yourself. You witness, you observe, you learn, you soften, you grow, without shame, without relentless comparison, without the endless pressure to be somewhere else, someone else. In this way, mindfulness births a kind of inner freedom that no amount of outer success could ever provide. And the more you live from that inner freedom, the more naturally your outer life begins to reflect it. You start choosing differently. You speak with more honesty. You spend your precious time and energy more wisely. You learn to say no when you need to, and to say yes with your whole, undivided being. Your actions become clearer because they're no longer tangled in past regrets or future anxieties. They're rooted firmly in this moment, the only place where real clarity ever exists. This, in essence, is how you join the natural intelligence of the universe. It isn't mystical or out of reach. It's how trees know when to shed their leaves, how rivers find their path, how your own heart continues to beat without needing to be reminded. When you stop resisting what's here, you begin to move in that same ancient rhythm. And that rhythm, though it may not always lead where your plans intended, carries you exactly where you need to go. Because the universe doesn't speak in words. It speaks in moments, in subtle feelings, in perfect timing, in synchronicity, in the gentle shift that happens the instant you stop striving and start listening. Presence is how you begin to hear this. And trust is what naturally begins to grow when you do. But this trust isn't naive. It's not passive, either. It's earned, breath by breath, moment by moment, through your willingness to show up now. Not to get somewhere, not to perfect yourself, but simply to be where you already are. And in that being, everything changes. You don't need to understand the entire design of the universe. You only need to be fully present for this one breath. And from that breath, take one steady, grounded step, fully here, fully alive, fully aligned. And as you continue to live this way, something quietly remarkable begins to happen. Logic, that tight, rigid grip on how things must be, starts to loosen. You stop demanding that everything makes sense in the old, linear way. The heart, once drowned out by the mind, begins to guide where reason used to rule. A different kind of knowing rises to the surface. One that can't be mapped, measured, or explained, but feels undeniable nonetheless. In this spaciousness, clarity comes not from analysis, but from direct experience. And this is where trust plants deeper roots. A trust that no longer needs to be explained or justified. A trust that simply is. This is precisely where Zen points us. Not toward polished answers, but toward openings. Zen doesn't try to explain the world to you. It throws you directly into it. It strips away the need for explanations and leaves you standing face to face with what is. At the heart of Zen's tradition are the koans, those strange, poetic, sometimes bewildering riddles or questions that refuse to be solved by logic alone. But koans aren't meant to frustrate or confuse you. They're tools designed to shake you loose from the trap of intellectual certainty. Sharp enough to cut through your mental habits, yet gentle enough to carry you straight back to presence. A koan doesn't ask you to think harder. It asks you to let go, to feel, to become so present that the barrier between the thinker and the thought dissolves completely. Perhaps the most well-known of these is deceptively simple. What is the sound of one hand clapping? And in that moment, The mind scrambles for answers. But Zen doesn't want your answer. It wants your presence. The mind instinctively searches for answers, for comparisons, for ideas it can grasp. It scrambles to make sense of what it doesn't immediately understand. But with a koan, every attempt to explain, to define, or to reason through it inevitably falls flat. And that's precisely the point. A koan isn't meant to be understood in the ordinary way. It's designed to frustrate the logical mind so completely that, at last, it surrenders, and in that quiet surrender, something deeper stirs awake. You see, koans act like mirrors. They reflect your mental habits right back at you. They show how quickly you reach to fix, to grasp, to label, to explain, and when all those familiar strategies fail, when there's nothing left to cling to, you're left face to face with what's always been here, this breath, this sensation, this moment of pure, unfiltered being. And when you stop fleeing from that space of uncertainty, you discover something unexpected, a clarity that doesn't come from figuring things out, but from dropping fully into what is. Trust, in the deepest sense, begins right there, not in solving, but in allowing, not in certainty, but in direct, intimate contact with your own experience. Koans train you to live in paradox, not to run from contradiction, but to see directly through it. You stop needing life to fit neatly into categories, and you start to feel at home in the vastness of mystery. And it's precisely in that mystery where real wisdom begins to grow. A traditional Zen koan might ask, without thinking of good or bad, "Who are you?" And at first, the mind freezes. It reaches for memories, for titles, for identity, for belief. It wants to analyze, to answer. But this question bypasses all those familiar layers. It asks, who are you when the labels fall away? Not what do you believe, or what do you claim, but what do you know in your bones? When thought itself falls silent, this kind of questioning isn't comfortable. In fact, it's meant to pull the rug out from under your usual sense of self. And that's exactly why it's powerful. Koans aren't crafted to keep you safe, they're meant to wake you up. And once you begin to wake, you realize that safety isn't found in having all the answers. It's discovered in your capacity to live deeply with the questions. Zen trusts this process completely. It doesn't rush you. It doesn't hand you neat explanations or tidy conclusions. It gives you a koan, and then waits for you to grow into it. The breakthrough never comes through force. It arrives when resistance drops away, when you stop trying to master the question and allow the question to dissolve the illusion of mastery itself. And in this way, koans reflect life itself. Life is filled with moments that defy logic, loss that doesn't make sense, joy that arrives without reason, coincidences that speak louder than facts. And every time you try to cage these things inside tidy explanations, you only create more tension. But when you start to meet life the way you meet a koan, curious, present, undefended, you begin to feel a different kind of intelligence moving quietly through it all. Koans also teach you how to listen in a new way, not for information, but for resonance. You begin to sense when something is true, even if it defies explanation. You trust your inner response more than external structures. You start to live from the body, from the breath, from the steady wisdom of the heart, not as a rejection of thought, but as a return to wholeness. In Zen practice, it's not uncommon to sit with a single koan for months, sometimes years, not to reach a tidy conclusion, but to allow the koan to slowly dismantle the false beliefs you've carried. The longer you stay with it, the more you see your mind's habitual patterns, the endless need to be right, the fear of silence, the craving for control, and little by little, those patterns soften. This is how koans dissolve mental resistance. They don't argue with the ego, they make it irrelevant. They point to what can't be named, only known, and in that direct knowing, you find something unshakable, not a concept, but a lived experience of truth. Something steady, something immovable beneath the noise. When trust is rooted in logic, it crumbles in the face of mystery. But when trust is rooted in presence, it thrives in the unknown. Koans prepare you for this. They teach you how to live without constant resolution, how to meet paradox with open hands, how to rest inside contradiction, not to escape the tension of life, but to settle right at the heart of it. This kind of spiritual training doesn't make you passive. In fact, it sharpens your awareness in ways you might not expect. It refines your ability to discern what's real and gently release what isn't. Little by little, it teaches you how to move through life without constantly reaching for reassurance. Because you no longer rely on external validation, you begin to trust the quiet depth you've touched within yourself, and that trust, over time, becomes incredibly practical. It shows up in how you speak, in the choices you make, in the way you relate to others. You stop over-explaining. You no longer feel the need to justify your existence or your decisions. You speak with clarity. You act with alignment, even when others don't fully understand you. And surprisingly, you're no longer living to be understood. You're living from a deeper place, one that understands, effortlessly, without needing to be acknowledged. Zen has a name for this. It calls it the not knowing mind. And don't mistake this for ignorance. It's not a lack of knowledge, it's openness. It's the quiet courage to admit, I don't know, and to remain steady right there. In that space, not knowing mind isn't about giving up on truth, it's about letting go of the illusion that you can possess it. You stop pretending to own truth, and instead, you let it reveal itself, in its own time, in its own way. And when truth finally arrives, it's not something you can explain to others. It's something you become. This is why Zen is so often quiet. It doesn't rush to prove. It doesn't seek to convert. It trusts that silence speaks, that presence teaches, and that paradox contains its own kind of answer, not one that satisfies the restless intellect, but one that calms the restless heart. Koans train you for this. They help you stop searching for life inside your thoughts and start truly living it. Here and now, they prepare you for those moments when words fail, when logic crumbles, but meaning fills the air like mist at dawn. Those are the moments when your only task is to be fully present, to let life move through you, unfiltered and unresisted. And make no mistake, this kind of presence takes courage. The courage to stop chasing certainty. The courage to rest inside discomfort. The courage to say, this doesn't make sense, but I trust it anyway. Koans build that courage, paradox by paradox, question by question, and in daily life, this shows up as a deeper calm. You stop rushing to fix what isn't broken. You stop needing to resolve every conversation, every tension, every discomfort. You learn to allow space for uncertainty, to let life be a little messy, a little unresolved, without losing your own center. And that kind of centeredness, soft, steady, grounded, becomes a quiet offering, not only to yourself but to everyone around you. Over time, koan practice evolves beyond the meditation cushion. It becomes your way of moving through the world. Every experience, every challenge, every relationship transforms into a kind of living koan. How do you respond to change without clinging? How do you love without needing to possess? How do you act wisely in a world that makes no promises? You don't answer these questions with words. You answer them with your life. And through that lived response, trust deepens. Not as a belief you cling to, but as a natural, unforced state of being. You stop waiting to feel safe before you trust. You start to know, not with your head but with your whole being, that you are already supported. Not by logic, not by guarantees, but by presence itself, by your alignment with what is. Koans don't take you away from life. They pull you deeper into it. They don't teach you what to think. They show you how to see. And once you truly see, you realize you don't need to understand everything. You need only to live it, one breath at a time. With both feet on the earth, and your heart wide open. This is the quiet power of Zen. The power of a question that cannot be answered. And the trust that naturally grows when you stop needing one. The more you allow paradox to soften your thinking, the more you'll notice something unexpected. You start to feel at ease in places that once confused or unsettled you. You no longer demand that life fit neatly together. You stop expecting truth to arrive on your schedule, in tidy little packages. You begin to see that truth doesn't always appear in answers. Sometimes, it arrives in the quiet, spacious acceptance that things are exactly as they need to be. There is no final answer, at least, not yet. And from this very space of not knowing, a new kind of possibility quietly emerges. It's not about merely surviving uncertainty, but about learning from it, trusting it, and even, in time, walking alongside it as a wise and unshaken guide. Buddhism, after all, never promised certainty. It has never claimed to erase the unknown or tidy up the mysteries of life. Instead, it invites us to meet him directly, to look straight into the heart of impermanence and call it what it truly is, part of the path. It names change, loss, and unpredictability not as mistakes, but as inevitable truths, and rather than urging us to fight against this truth, it gently invites us to lean in, to discover for ourselves that what the mind fears most, the shifting, the unraveling, the unknown, is not a problem to be fixed, but a reality to be understood. And this understanding begins, as so many meaningful things do, with acceptance, but not the kind of acceptance that shrugs in defeat. It's a clear-eyed, steady kind of acceptance, one that sees things as they are, not as we wish them to be. It recognizes that uncertainty isn't some flaw in life's design, it is the design. Nothing in this world is fixed. Not your thoughts, not your emotions, not your circumstances. And the sooner you make peace with this, the less energy you waste trying to force life into a shape it was never meant to hold. When you accept this, you stop waiting for perfect plans, or for a path lined with guarantees. You begin to live in a deeper, quieter rhythm, one that listens more than it demands. And you realize why uncertainty stirs so much discomfort, because the mind craves control. It clings to stories, expectations, and imagined outcomes in a desperate attempt to shield itself from what it cannot predict. But life, in its natural and uncontainable way, doesn't follow those scripts, and when reality contradicts our carefully constructed plans, suffering is born. But here's the heart of the teaching: the suffering isn't born from the unknown itself. It's born from our resistance to it, from the way we tighten around what might happen, instead of letting life move as it will. When you begin to loosen that resistance, even a little, fear begins to soften. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop gripping. You continue to make choices, to move through life with intention. But you do it with openness, with the quiet understanding that while effort matters, control is, and always was, an illusion. And this simple, powerful shift begins to change how you experience anxiety. When uncertainty no longer feels like a threat to your safety, your nervous system starts to relax. You begin to see those frantic mental spirals not as inevitable truths, but as habits, old patterns that no longer serve you. And in those moments, you learn to pause, to feel discomfort without immediately feeding it, to stay present in the vast, unformed space between what is and what will be. Staying present inside uncertainty is an act of deep, courageous trust. not in a particular outcome, but in your own inner capacity, your ability to meet whatever comes, to respond, to adjust, to begin again, as many times as necessary. This is what the Buddha pointed to, again and again, not the end of change, but the end of clinging. That's where true freedom lives. Not in getting what you want, not in knowing what's next, but in no longer needing those things in order to be at peace. And here's a beautiful secret: uncertainty, when you stop fearing it, becomes a gateway to creativity. When you release your tight grip on one fixed path, you suddenly see many. When you let go of rigid definitions and expectations, entirely new perspectives appear. What once felt like loss turns into open space. What seemed like failure becomes a pivot point. What felt like being stuck transforms into a pause filled with quiet. Untapped potential. The unknown ceases to be a blank void. It comes alive with possibilities you hadn't considered, with new directions you couldn't have planned. And this is why presence is essential. Because when you aren't present, the mind rushes ahead, spinning stories, fueled by assumption, riddled with fear. But when you remain here, in this breath, in this moment, you discover something simple and profound. Right now, you are okay, you are breathing, you are held by the earth beneath you, and the next step doesn't have to be clear for you to take it. Buddhism doesn't teach us to avoid change. It teaches us to move with it. Like water flowing around stone, you learn to stay fluid, to adapt, to meet each moment with openness, not as a threat to your stability, but as a doorway into your deepening. Each time you surrender the need to know, you strengthen the quiet courage that already lives within you. When you begin to make space within yourself, something unexpected starts to happen. Wisdom begins to emerge, not in a loud, grand, or dramatic way, but softly, quietly, like the steady glow of dawn before sunrise. It's not made of sudden, sweeping answers. It rises slowly, breath by breath, like mist lifting off a still lake. You start to listen more deeply, not just to the endless chatter in your mind, but to your body, your intuition, to the subtle hum of your surroundings. You stop clinging to the need for certainty. Instead, you start building trust from the inside out. And trust, in this form, isn't passive. It's a discipline, a gentle but firm practice. It calls you back to presence whenever fear tries to drag you away. It invites you to keep showing up, even when outcomes remain uncertain, even when clarity seems just out of reach. It asks you to feel your vulnerability, not as weakness, but as openness, as connection. And over time, you realize something profound: you are not the only one standing in this unknown. Everyone you pass, every soul you meet, carries their own uncertainty, even if they hide it behind calm faces and polished words. You stop comparing your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel. You stop assuming you're the only one who hasn't figured it all out. And in that recognition, your judgments soften, compassion naturally arises. You remember that being human isn't about certainty, it's about presence. Buddhism calls this beginner's mind. It's the practice of approaching each moment with openness, curiosity, and the humility of not knowing. And this simple attitude can transform your relationship with growth. You stop pretending you should already have it together. You let go of the rush toward answers. You start to truly listen, not to what you expect, but to what life is actually asking of you. Right here, right now. This approach builds a steady, grounded stability, not because it secures the future, but because it meets each unfolding moment without needing to escape from it. You stop fearing change because you've quietly trained yourself to rest in the unknown. You've discovered, over and over, that even when the ground beneath your feet shifts, you don't fall, you find your footing again, and again, and again. This is how you develop real, inner confidence, not a confidence in outcomes or guarantees, but in your own presence, not in always being right, but in being real, and people feel it. Your calm becomes a mirror for others. Your steadiness a quiet invitation. Your openness becomes a safe place where trust can grow. When you stop needing to know everything, you begin to truly see. You notice the small signals life offers, the soft tug of intuition, the unexpected timing of a conversation, the way silence can sometimes say more than 1,000 words. These subtle cues often go unseen when you're caught in overthinking. But when you relax into not knowing, they reveal themselves with surprising clarity. This shift changes how you make decisions too. You stop trying to guarantee success or control every outcome. Instead, you listen for alignment. You make the best choice you can with the wisdom you have in that moment. And then, you let go. You trust that even if things turn out differently than you hoped, you will grow. You stop needing every decision to be final. You understand that you can always adjust. You can always begin again. In Buddhist practice, inquiry is not meant to lead you to one single, final truth. It's there to make you more curious about what's happening right now. Curiosity begins to replace fear. Wonder takes the place of anxiety. And you find yourself asking better, deeper questions. What is life teaching me here? What is this discomfort showing me about myself? What emotion needs to be felt rather than fixed? These kinds of questions don't come with quick, tidy answers, but they open the heart. And when the heart is open, you no longer contract in the face of uncertainty. You breathe into it, you stay with it, you trust that you are part of a larger, beautiful unfolding, even if you can't see the whole design just yet. Gradually, you begin to experience a kind of faith, not the kind built on believing a story, but the kind that comes from simply staying with what's real without running away. Faith, in this way, is not brittle or defensive. It's deeply grounded. It doesn't need to shut out new experience. In fact, it grows stronger the more you open to life as it is. And every time you meet uncertainty with presence, faith deepens. Every time you hold discomfort without closing your heart, faith expands. And over time, this steady presence you've been cultivating becomes your new foundation. And Buddhism gently reminds us of a truth we so often resist. It is clinging that gives birth to suffering. Clinging to fixed outcomes, clinging to old identities, clinging to what once worked, but no longer serves. And so, letting go isn't about loss. It's about creating space. Space for what is real now. Space for new ways of being. Space for the natural unfolding of transformation. And if you've noticed, transformation rarely arrives through certainty. It comes, more often than not, through disorientation, through shedding, through stepping into the tender, raw unknown. Those moments, they can feel like loss, like the ground beneath you has vanished. But in truth, they are openings, invitations, quiet whispers urging you to trust something deeper than your well-laid plans. To see how far you've truly come, to take another step, even when the path ahead lies in shadows. This is why Buddhist practice was never about escaping life's storms. It was never meant to pull you away from the messiness, the heartbreak, or the joy. It invites you to step in fully, to meet it all, without filters, without false promises, with every part of who you are. You stop needing to protect yourself from change. Instead, you learn to bow to it, to let it shape you, to let it strip away what was never yours to keep, and reveal what only the unknown can offer. Uncertainty is no longer the enemy. It becomes your practice, your teacher, and the path itself. And when you start to trust this path, truly trust it, you realize something quietly beautiful. You don't need to know everything. You only need to be present for what's here, right now. The future, it unfolds from that presence. The answers, they rise from that stillness. And the freedom you've been chasing all this time? It lives not in certainty, but in your willingness to stay open-handed, with a steady breath and a heart wide enough to hold whatever comes. Learning to stay grounded within uncertainty isn't a small act. It changes everything. You stop demanding that life fits into your timelines. You start listening, really listening, to the natural unfolding of each moment. And soon, you begin to sense that the unknown isn't a punishment, nor a threat. It is a fertile, creative space where new things can take root. In this new relationship with uncertainty, a deeper kind of trust quietly forms, one that reaches far beyond individual moments, beyond fleeting days and seasons, and stretches into entire lifetimes. Because this is what the Dharma points to, again and again, not just to this moment of uncertainty, but to the grand cycle of existence itself. Buddhism names it samsara, the endless wheel of birth and death, of gain and loss, of hope and disappointment. It's the ceaseless turning of life's seasons, joy, sorrow, growth, decay, on and on. And here's what's important, in Buddhist teaching, samsara isn't a mistake. It isn't some flaw in the design. It is the nature of all conditioned existence. And it's not something we escape through denial or resistance. It's something we're invited to see clearly, to understand deeply, and in that understanding, to discover freedom. Now, many people hear the word samsara and immediately think of suffering. And yes, suffering is woven through it. But suffering is only one thread in a much larger, richer tapestry. Samsara also holds everything that has shaped you, everything that's softened you, broken you open, made you more tender. It contains every challenge that forged insight, every ending that revealed unexpected strength, every failure that humbled you into something real. To trust samsara is to trust the process, not as a comforting theory, but as a wisdom earned through lived experience, through falling, rising, and falling again. And this kind of trust, it isn't passive. It's not about waiting idly for life to improve. It's built, slowly, patiently, through awareness and reflection. The more you start paying attention to the patterns of your own life, the more you see a profound truth: nothing stays still. The grief you once thought would never ease softens in time. The fear that paralyzed you begins to loosen its grip. The story you believed defined you becomes just another chapter. Samsara reveals this. Everything moves, even the things you were sure would last forever. And that movement is not random. It's governed by cause and effect, by intention and consequence, by effort and timing. But most of all, it is governed by one inescapable truth: impermanence. When you resist this truth, the truth of impermanence, of constant change, the cycle becomes painful. It tightens around you like a knot. But when you begin to align yourself with it, when you soften your grip and lean in, something remarkable happens. The cycle transforms from a source of suffering into a quiet, patient teacher. Buddhism never asks us to bypass suffering, nor does it suggest we numb ourselves to discomfort. Instead, it invites us to see it clearly, to walk through it with presence, with curiosity. One of the most profound shifts on the path is when you stop seeing suffering as a sign that something is going wrong, and begin seeing it as a moment of transformation in disguise. This doesn't mean you romanticize pain or go searching for it. It means you stop turning away. You begin to notice what your pain is asking of you, where it's pointing, what it's trying, in its clumsy, uncomfortable way, to teach. Because in samsara, no state lasts forever. Nothing stays frozen. Even your resistance is moving. Even your numbness is part of the process. And when you learn to trust that motion, to recognize that nothing is stuck, you stop rushing to escape the hard parts. You begin staying with them long enough to understand, long enough to let them shape you, not in a way that breaks you, but in a way that strengthens something deeper within. That's why the Buddhist path speaks so often of rebirth. Not only the literal rebirth from lifetime to lifetime, but the countless inner rebirths that happen in a single life, each time you let go of the old. Each time you die to what no longer serves you, and open yourself to what waits beneath the surface. And rebirth isn't about forgetting the past. It's about no longer being chained to it. Every time you meet your suffering with compassion, something new begins to stir. Every time you stop blaming and start listening, the cycle shifts, even if just a little. You begin to realize you're not repeating the same patterns for the sake of repetition. You're being shown over and over where freedom is still possible. Samsara isn't here to trap you. It's here to reveal what you haven't yet seen clearly. Every loop, every difficult moment, every heartbreak brings you a little closer to awareness, if you're willing to look with open eyes. The more you walk this path, the more you learn to recognize the difference between pain that teaches and pain that repeats out of unawareness. You start seeing your patterns, not as personal failings, but as natural echoes of cause and effect. You notice the places where you keep touching the same hot stove, hoping, somehow, this time it won't burn. And then, you begin to ask deeper, braver questions. Not, why is this happening to me? But, what am I still holding on to? What story am I still telling myself? This kind of questioning won't always bring immediate relief, but it does bring depth. And from that depth, real transformation becomes possible. You stop trying to skip ahead to the easy parts. You realize the same lessons, the same patterns, will keep returning until they're met with your full attention. And slowly, samsara, this endless, imperfect, relentless cycle, becomes your classroom. Not because it's perfect, but because it's honest. It reveals what you still cling to. It shows you what you avoid. It shines a light on the beliefs you quietly carry, the places you dare not look. The Buddha taught that awakening doesn't come from running away from the cycle, or from pretending it isn't there. It comes from understanding it deeply, from becoming so familiar with its movements that you stop getting swept away by them. You learn to stand in the middle of the storm and still see clearly, to feel deeply, without drowning, to hold space for both beginnings and endings, for arrivals and departures, without clinging to either. And slowly, this changes how you see others. You realize they too are caught in cycles. They too are being shaped by forces you cannot see. Their mistakes, their fears, their distance, it all begins to make sense. This recognition brings empathy. You stop expecting people to be further along than they are. You stop demanding perfection from those who, like you, are still stumbling through their lessons. You begin to hold space for their process, just as you're learning to hold space for your own. This doesn't mean you allow harm. It doesn't mean you excuse unkindness or abandon your boundaries. What it means is that you stop taking other people's behavior so personally. You begin to see that they too are caught in their own wheel, their own samsara, and that wheel doesn't spin endlessly just for the sake of turning. It turns until the lesson is learned, until the view shifts, until a soul no longer needs to repeat that same old story. And this is how samsara gradually transforms into wisdom. Every turn of the wheel offers a slightly new angle, a fresh insight, another layer of clarity you might have missed before. The repetition you once called failure starts to feel more like refinement, like a sculptor patiently chipping away at stone, shaping something finer with each pass. When you begin to live with this view, you stop demanding that life be free from difficulty in order for you to be at peace. Instead, you start using difficulty as a mirror, reflecting your inner world, revealing the places where growth still waits. You stop asking for comfort as a precondition for peace. And somehow, Peace starts to show up in your ability to stay open, no matter what the cycle brings. Even when it brings loss. Even when it brings change you didn't choose. You trust that the wheel keeps turning, and you'll keep growing. Samsara doesn't shrink you, it humbles you. It strips away the illusions you thought would save you, and leaves you standing with what actually matters: presence, compassion, wisdom. And these aren't just pretty words. These are qualities forged inside the very cycle you once tried to escape, through heartbreak, through confusion, through brief sparks of hope and flashes of clarity, through the relentless courage to face yourself again and again, even when it hurts. When you begin to trust samsara, life stops being a problem you're desperately trying to solve. It starts to feel like a rhythm you're learning to follow. You notice the low points aren't the end, they're the fertile ground from which the next chapter quietly begins. Just as winter cradles the seed of spring, your deepest darkness cradles the seed of awakening, but only if you stay. Only if you have the patience to listen. In this way, suffering becomes sacred, not because it's something you chase, but because it becomes useful. It weaves itself into the fabric of your awakening. It stops being separate from your path, and becomes a thread of it. You begin to look back and realize that even in your hardest moments, something essential was being revealed. Something was being asked of you, to release what was no longer yours, to forgive what you once clung to change direction when the old path grew narrow, to open more fully to the truth you were afraid to face. Rebirth, seen through this lens, isn't about escape, it's about returning, again and again, to your own inner clarity, to the awareness that remains steady while everything else shifts. The more you return, the less you fear the wheel. You stop imagining it as a trap. You start seeing it as movement, as life itself. You learn you can meet it with steadiness and softness, without needing to run, and that steadiness becomes your strength. You no longer get thrown off balance by every unexpected twist. You recognize the pattern, and you step a little more lightly. You begin to make choices that align with your deeper values, not your old wounds. You start turning the wheel with intention, not to escape it, but to participate in it with wisdom. And when you fall, as everyone inevitably does, you don't collapse in defeat. You remember this is part of the path too, that every setback is another turn of the wheel, another lesson in the unfolding. You remember that healing isn't a straight line, that freedom isn't found in perfection, but in your willingness to keep moving forward, with open eyes and a soft heart, through every chapter. You stop seeing yourself as broken. You start seeing yourself as becoming. Not failing, but learning. Not stuck, but ripening. Samsara becomes the very ground where awakening takes root. Not despite your suffering, but because of it. Not by avoiding the cycle, but by walking through it with trust. Trusting that even in pain, something essential is quietly being born. You are being shaped, even now. Even in the middle of your confusion. When clarity feels far away, something in you still sees. Some deeper awareness, quiet but steady, recognizes that this very moment, however uncomfortable or uncertain, is part of something much larger. Something unfinished, something that isn't done with you yet. And in that quiet trust, you keep going, you continue to show up, with presence, with intention, and with faith, not blind faith, but faith in the rhythm of life itself, and in your own place within that rhythm. As you learn to trust the turning of the cycle, you begin to notice something else. Something subtle, but unmistakably real. It's not just that life moves through you. It's that your inner world, your thoughts, your emotions, your attitudes, also shape the way life moves around you. The more clearly you see, the more clearly the world seems to respond. When you soften, the people and situations around you begin to soften too. When you resist, resistance seems to rise up everywhere. And this isn't just a poetic metaphor. It's a living truth. The universe doesn't only send events your way, it mirrors your state of mind. The way you meet each moment quietly changes what happens next. Not through control, but through resonance. Not as a system of reward and punishment, but as the natural law of reflection. In Tibetan Buddhism, this understanding is woven into every teaching. The outer world is never truly separate from the inner. There's no clean dividing line between what you carry inside and what appears before you. The world becomes a mirror, not of the person you wish you were, but of the person you are. Right now, not your roles, not your performances, but the energy you bring into each moment. When your mind is clouded with fear, everything around you feels unstable. When your heart is armored, every interaction seems distant and disconnected. But when you begin to trust, even in small, quiet ways, the world subtly shifts in response. Not because you've mastered some cosmic control panel, but because you've finally aligned yourself with what's already moving through you. And this alignment isn't forceful. It's not about trying to manifest specific outcomes or bend life to your preferences. It's about recognizing that your perception shapes the texture of your life. Perception is never neutral. It's always filtered through belief, emotion, memory, and expectation. When you believe you are unsafe, even ordinary, harmless situations feel threatening. When you carry the belief that you are unworthy, sincere kindness can seem suspicious, as if it's too good to be true. But when you begin to trust your own awareness, when you relax into clarity, even just a little, the world begins to shift. Not because the facts themselves have changed, but because your relationship to those facts has softened. This is the essence of what some traditions call the cosmic mirror. The universe reflects back what you carry within. When your thoughts race, the day feels chaotic. When you slow down, clarity quietly returns. When you bring presence to your conversations, connection deepens. The mirror does not lie. It simply reflects. And if you're willing to look with honesty, the reflection becomes a teacher. Of course, this isn't always comfortable. Sometimes the mirror reveals patterns you'd rather not face. The tension you blamed on others. The old wound you pretended didn't hurt. The subtle ways you've been avoiding your own heart. But this is where real growth begins, not in denying what appears, but in seeing it as an invitation. If the world around you feels tight, maybe your inner world needs a little softening. If the same conflicts keep repeating, perhaps your response is ready to evolve. Life isn't attacking you, it's revealing you to yourself. And what it reveals always points towards something you're ready now to finally meet. In this light, every experience becomes an opportunity to know yourself more intimately. Not through overthinking or endless analysis, but through simple presence. You don't need to judge what you find. You don't need to fix it right away. You simply need to notice. Notice the reaction, the feeling, the tightness in your chest, the heat in your face. These are signals. They tell you what you believe, what you expect, what you're still carrying, and what you might be ready to set down. And as you become more aware of what lives within you, the reflection in the world starts to shift too. The universe begins to respond not to your fear, but to your awareness, not to your control, but to your openness. This is why trust matters. Not blind trust, but an embodied, lived trust, the kind that grows each time you choose honesty over performance, presence over pretense. Each time you stop trying to manipulate outcomes and start aligning with what is real. That kind of trust changes your energy. Not in some mystical, abstract way, but in the most practical sense. It changes how you move through your day. It changes how you listen, how you speak, how you hold space for yourself and for others. And in that steady, grounded presence, something beautiful begins to happen. One by one, It begins to change you. It softens your posture, reshapes your choices, tempers your tone, and deepens your presence. And that presence, quiet, steady, unforced, begins to shape what comes next. This is why your inner state cannot be separated from the path you walk. If you long for peace, you must first cultivate it within. If you're seeking clarity, you must learn to release the noise. If it's connection you crave, then soften the walls you've built around your heart. Life doesn't hand you what you demand. It meets you exactly where you are. This isn't chance, nor is it some unpredictable roulette wheel. It's resonance, a fundamental law of how energy moves, how the universe responds. It is the language of life itself. In Tibetan teachings, the mind is often described as a projector. The images you hold inside, the thoughts you feed, the beliefs you cling to, these are the slides. The world around you becomes the screen. And if you don't realize you're the one setting the projection, you'll keep reacting to the images on the screen as if they are objective, unchanging truths. But the moment you recognize the source, everything shifts. You stop blaming the screen for what you see. You reach for the lens. You change the slide. This doesn't mean you control reality. It means you gain the power to shape how you meet it. And that simple shift, from unconscious reaction to conscious awareness, changes everything. When you meet a moment with fear, you brace, you contract. The world feels tight, harsh, threatening. But when you meet the same moment with openness, you adapt. And when you meet it with love, even difficulty itself becomes a kind of teacher. This isn't about fixing your emotions or forcing yourself to feel a certain way. It's about being honest enough to notice which emotion is leading you right now, which posture you've unconsciously assumed before the next step even arrives. And with that awareness, you're no longer a passenger to your moods. You're the one choosing your footing. The mirror of life also reflects what lives beneath the surface, the unconscious material you've ignored, avoided, or buried. The parts of you left unexamined still speak through what the world brings to your door. Unprocessed grief shows up in your relationships. Buried anger leaks into your decisions. Resentments color your reactions. This isn't punishment. It's energy seeking balance. The universe isn't exposing you to shame you. It's trying to wake you up. And when you start meeting these reflections with curiosity rather than self-blame, change becomes possible. You no longer need to protect an old story or defend an outdated identity. Instead, you start asking better, deeper questions. What is this moment showing me about myself? What belief is being mirrored back? How might this shift if I met it with a little more kindness? A little less armor? This kind of awareness doesn't make you passive. It makes you powerful in the most grounded, unshakable way. Because now your actions come from clarity, not reactivity. You stop running the same tired loops. You pause, you see, you make space for something new to appear. And in that space, the world mirrors something new in return. You also stop taking things so personally. When someone throws their pain at you, you don't absorb it. You recognize it for what it is, their reflection, their unfinished story, their wheel still turning. This doesn't mean you accept harm. It means you create stronger boundaries with less resentment. You don't have to retaliate. You simply step out of the old cycle. You choose a new frequency, a new posture, and the mirror shifts with you. Even the circumstances around you begin to feel different. Not because life always improves on the outside, but because you are no longer at war with what is. A delayed plan becomes a chance to breathe. A difficult conversation becomes an opportunity to practice compassion. A disappointment becomes a moment for realignment. These shifts aren't magic. They're rooted in presence. They happen because you stop fighting what's here and start meeting it, fully, honestly, with both feet on the ground. And as you begin to live this way, Something deeper unfolds. You stop searching for meaning outside yourself. You begin to realize that meaning is made, not found. It arises in how you meet each moment. You stop waiting for signs to tell you what to do. You become the sign. Your own clarity becomes your compass. Your own peace becomes your path. This is how trust transforms perception, not through force, but through alignment. You begin to trust that whatever is showing up carries a message for you. That what you need to see will be revealed when you stop trying to force it. That the universe, when met with awareness, stops being an obstacle and starts becoming a partner. And this partnership is built not on fantasy or escape, but on raw, honest presence. You cannot hide from the mirror. It follows you everywhere, in every moment, reflecting not the image you wish to see, but the energy you actually carry. And in every situation, in every relationship, in every silent pause, you are being shown something. The only choice you have is how you meet that reflection. Will it be with blame or with curiosity? With avoidance or with attention? With fear or with faith? That choice, quietly but surely, is always yours, and the reflection responds in kind. Even in the quietest moments, when it seems like nothing is happening, the mirror is still active. It's alive, responding to your state of being, to the openness of your heart, to the quality of your attention. What you hold within is already shaping what's on its way to you. But this isn't a reason for pressure. It's a reminder of your power. It means your inner state is the most important place to begin. So you begin there. You check in with your breath. You notice your posture. You observe your thoughts. You pay attention to what's moving through you. And when you notice you've tightened, you soften. When you see distraction, you return, not to be perfect, not to control what the mirror shows, but to walk with integrity, to meet life honestly, to be real. And something remarkable happens when you walk that way. The reflection shifts. You no longer have to chase validation. You start to receive resonance. You don't need to force progress. It begins to unfold naturally, one moment at a time, simply because you're present for it. This is how Tibetan Buddhism teaches transformation, not by escaping life's reflections, not by trying to control every detail, but by tending to your own clarity, by seeing through the fog of assumptions and old stories, by clearing the lens, breath by breath, day by day. And the clearer your inner lens becomes, the more directly life speaks to you. When you learn to trust what it shows, even when it's uncomfortable, you start growing in a different way. Not toward perfection, but toward wholeness. The cosmic mirror is always here, waiting, reflecting, every situation, every challenge, every reaction. It's not here to test you. It's here to reveal you. And when you're ready to look, even the hardest reflections become part of your awakening. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this showing me about how I show up?" And that one shift, from victim to co-creator, changes everything. You realize life isn't asking you to control it. It's asking you to meet it. Not with force, but with alignment. Not with perfection, but with presence. When you push, the mirror pushes back. When you resist, resistance meets you in everything. But when you move with clarity, effort feels different. It's no longer a fight to prove or a chase to hold on. It becomes steady. It becomes intentional. It moves without tension. This is what Buddhist practice calls right effort. And it's not about pushing harder. It's not about climbing faster. It is, in fact, the opposite of forcing. It's the energy of sincerity without strain, of dedication without obsession. It's how you move when your actions rise from trust rather than fear. Right effort has a very specific feel. It knows the difference between what you can shape and what you cannot. It recognizes when to lean in and when to release. It acts without grasping. It works without struggle. It moves toward progress without the harshness of self-punishment. In the Eightfold Path, right effort is described in a simple, elegant way. It is the energy to prevent unwholesome states from arising, to abandon those already present, to cultivate wholesome states, and to sustain those that have begun. A steady tending of your inner garden, a practice not of perfection, but of presence. And so, as we come to the end of this quiet reflection, remember, you don't have to control every outcome. You don't have to have all the answers. You only need to meet this moment, exactly as it is, with a steady breath and an open heart. Life isn't testing you, it's showing you. And the more gently you're willing to see, the more clearly it begins to unfold. If tonight's reflection brought you a little more calm, a little more ease before sleep, know that this is part of a much deeper journey. This video is one part of our Fall Asleep Wisdom series, gentle nightly reminders to soften, to return to presence, and to rest in what's real. When you're ready, you can explore the rest of the series in the playlist below. Until then, sleep well, let this moment be enough. And trust, you are exactly where you need to be.